been the day that my working life disruption is minimal, because there's a commercial view on that, and I don't want it to affect clients or my business. So there's business. That's a definite priority, and maybe the living space isn't so much. If I have if my bedroom is a sanctuary, then I could go and read in there, and that could be fine. So if that was kept very clean and clear, that would be fine.
Okay. So
it's probably work and sleep.
Yeah. And is that, when you used the word sanctuary then early on, is that what you meant by sanctuary?
So for me, a sanctuary is a clean, clear space where I can be without interruption, and I have space to think.
And would those things that you just said in terms of the workspace and the bedroom, would that give you that?
I think it would, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's go back to your list of negatives again then. You mentioned quite specific things. What else then could you do to turn some of those negatives into a positive?
I think another big thing is about contracts. So contract with the architect, contract with the builders, setting very clear expectations as to who does what, when, who's different roles. So it reminds me of somebody who came to work in an office who said right at the outset she didn't drink tea and she wouldn't be making tea. And it's, I do drink tea, but I won't be making tea for everybody.
Yeah.
So it might seem a small thing, but actually that's quite a major disruption.
Yeah.
So I think it all begins when, so the contract, typically in the past what we did a contract but just based on a price.
Right.
But I think there needs to be a more detailed set of expectations here, beyond the price of the finished job and payment terms. It's actually about how we work together.
Okay. Do you want to go into any more specific than that, or is it?
I think that's really an action to take away and think about the details of that. Yeah, that needs to happen.
You also mentioned the building work happening, the roof being off during the winter months.
Yes.
What was the sort of learning that you took from that?
It was cold.
So how did you take the learning? And tell me.
Well, I think we just have to be quite clever about the heating system and securing space. It is not envisaged that it will be such a major upheaval, but things are often worse than.
Yeah.
So that's a consideration to look at what's the impact on heating through the winter, if we do it in the winter.
Yeah. And you said before that you started work on the roof in September, and then the work took longer than planned?
Well, it took a little bit longer than planned, but there was a lot of very major finishing off to be done internally once the builders had left, which shouldn't be such a problem this time.
Okay.
Because we're adding space on, but we're not having to cut through dramatically, I don't think, into the existing space. So I think a lot can be done outside before we cut through into roof space and things and join it up.
Okay.
I hope, but we need to work on that.
So you say, I hope?
Yes, there is a fairly complicated roof system that needs to be built, so there needs to be quite detailed conversations around how and when that happens, how it gets cut into the existing building.
Okay, and obviously you'll have a recording of today's conversation, so you'll be able to go back to some of these things that you're sort of listing out now. So a couple of other things that you mentioned when you were going through your list of negatives. or figures that you learned. You said about having people coming into the house who you didn't know, you hadn't been introduced to. What's the learning from that? How could you reframe that?
Well, again, we need, from the builder's side, we need a project manager who is responsible for his or her team. And we don't have odd job people coming through unexpectedly.
Okay.
So that's, again, it's part of the contract with the architect and the project manager.
And you mentioned the architect before as well, who you thought was going to be doing that, I think you said?
Yes, we're using a different company this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we are wiser.
So again, do you want to go into any more of the detail of?
I don't think so. It's it feels like this time we need to be in control of the project, or much more actively involved. I think last time we trusted the architect and the builders just to get on and do it, thinking they knew what they were doing, but actually they needed much closer management.
Okay.
And now we're 20 years older and wiser and tougher, so we don't take no nonsense now. But
You have the experience.
I have a bit more experience of managing children for 20 years, as well as business experience.
So another thing that you mentioned as well that that happened last time was that you had items stolen.
Yes, which it was impossible to prove when. Yes, because everything was in complete disarray. It was only when things were being put back together that we found that valuables were missing. So there's some learning there about securing valuables. So that's part of, it's almost like there's a checklist of things that we need to do.
It's sounding like that, isn't it? Yeah.
So there's a preparation of the space before other people enter it, essentially. Yeah. So I think probably quite a lot of Bob's tools also went missing from the garage and things. I mean, I'm just amazed. Builders came into the kitchen one day and sort of, just asked me if they could borrow a tape measure because they had to measure sort of, the length of the wall they were building and they hadn't got a measure.
Yeah.
And they would borrow spades from the garden shed. I mean, fairly basic things, shovels to mix their cement.
So any ideas then in terms of how you could sort of counter that with a positive?
Well, I think that's part of the contracting with them, isn't it? We expect you to bring your tools, everything that you need. If you can ask us if you're stuck, but we don't expect to be providing very basic things. And there's definitely it's completely unacceptable to take or borrow anything of ours without a conversation about it first.
Yeah. You seem very sure of that. I noticed the change in the face. I was like, you can't borrow anything.
Well, I think I was just too easygoing really before.
Okay. So have we missed anything? Going through the list of things that you wanted to turn into a positive.
No, I think there's some real detailed stuff here that I need to work out with my husband rather than us just diving straight in.
Yeah.
And I think there's also a bigger question at the moment over our heads as to we haven't actually made a commitment to do this work other than planning consent. I think there's a bigger question as to, is it commercial? Is the expenditure actually going to give us the return long term?
Right.
So is it worth it? So, and that's probably not something for today, but that's again is part of my checklist. And it's not just a financial thing. Is it worth? We just need to really look at the upheaval and what's the impact on the business. My work and his work, so there's a cost. There's always a cost involved if time is allocated to managing these other projects. So we need to factor those things in.